Up first is Keynote Peter Buckland presenting Separating True Innovation from Passing Trends in AI. Peter is a partner, managing director, and COO at Khosla Ventures, bringing over 20 years of experience advising founders and technology companies in Silicon Valley. He leads the firm's fundraising efforts and oversees operations across talent, finance, investor relations, and legal. Before joining Khosla Ventures, Peter was a partner at WilmerHale, where he led the firm's emerging growth technology practice and guided clients through hundreds of financing and strategic transactions. Please help me welcome Peter to the stage.
Hey guys, how are you? I love Bend, so super happy to be invited here and be a small part of your community. In the past, it was a lot of fishing and skiing, and so now it's great to be a little part of your ecosystem. So as I said, I'm going to try to cover quite a bit today, starting kind of at the macro and then going down into some more practical advice. So it's lots to cover, but hopefully we can kind of drill down into anything in particular you guys want to talk about in the Q&A session. So my first question is, are we in a massive hype cycle or something else, and does it matter for you guys, the entrepreneurs? Well, obviously, no one knows for sure how the cycle is going to turn out. There are many reasons to have skepticism, including the valuations at which very early startups can raise capital and kind of the circular nature of these large amounts of capital flowing between the hyperscalers and startups. But I've been through a handful of prior important technology-driven cycles, and I'm the first to admit that there is a loud voice in my head that says this time is probably the same as the past, and we're going to have some major correction sooner rather than later, or maybe hopefully later. But if I'm honest, I'll admit that there's another voice saying maybe this time is different. I think there are two likely possible outcomes for the current AI cycle. Number one, this is a period of important technology-driven disruption, similar to past cycles like the adoption of the internet, cloud computing, mobile, and social, which will result in the creation of a new generation of highly valuable companies and modify how a large number of us work. Or we are experiencing a technology transformation, the likes of which we haven't seen before, that will have profound transformative impacts on every aspect of society and the economy, including the physical world, which would be a first. I'm pretty certain that it's not less than one of those two things. So here's a few reasons why I think we're not in a hype cycle and why this one might be different. Number one, the speed at which AI is advancing. It's faster and broader than any prior cycle that I've seen. It's hard to remember, actually, that ChatGPT only came out almost exactly 3 years ago, and now there isn't a boardroom in America that isn't spending significant time discussing how to implement their AI strategies. We used to worry about like kind of what our kids were going to do in the future as we became more digital. We thought like CS degrees would be amazing, and now we're realizing that these white-collar technical workers are going to be the first people to be displaced. So it's a time of a lot of change. It's also clear that AI and robotics are going to have major impacts on the physical world. And like I said, that's kind of hasn't been the case in the past. And that's in a broad range of applications, from health to defense to discovery of minerals, power generation, and more. Most cycles predominantly impacted the digital world. In other words, it's clear that past tech cycles impacted increasing larger percentages of the economy, but I can't think of a single segment of the economy today that's not likely to be disrupted by AI. And then the impact that AI is having on all of us is pretty astonishing, even in this very early part of the cycle. So I doubt there's anyone here that hasn't used ChatGPT to write a speech. I tried a little bit. It didn't work. To socialize, to do stuff at work, it's just pretty incredible. I mean, like for people my age, Google was a verb that lasted for 20 years, and literally in the past 2 years, my kids don't use Google anymore. It's all ChatGPT. When you think about the amount of money that's being spent in this cycle, it's hard to comprehend. So if you look back to prior cycles like the dot-com bust, lots of money was spent on telecom infrastructure. And then when the bust happened, there was too much capacity. Obviously, eventually, that capacity was taken up. But what we're talking about now is, by some estimates, $3 trillion of infrastructure spending over the next 3 years, and that's kind of unfathomable, right? That's 10% of current GDP. But I think that this build-out will have broader impacts on the economy beyond just AI. For example, if you look at the data center build out, there's not enough power to power these data centers today. So a number of these data center providers are building their own power plants, which is like kind of hard to imagine. But the good news about that is that if you look at some of the aging infrastructure in the US, it's not obvious kind of who's going to take the lead in building that out. And now we have a big incentive for private capital to come in and upgrade our infrastructure for us. Also very different is the kind of ramp up in revenue that I'm seeing at companies this time around. It used to be pretty impressive to get to $10 million of revenue. It used to take a couple years. Now we're seeing companies in kind of a 2 to 3 year period go from kind of 0 to 20 to 100, and there's lots of those companies, so it's incredible. And some companies like OpenAI already hitting billions of dollars of revenue. And then the other thing that's a little pretty different is the geopolitical aspect of this, right? The kind of world competition that's going on between the US and China specifically, I think is viewed by many people, including important policymakers, as an existential risk. And I really don't recall any prior technologies being considered such a vital aspect of national security and hard power. But here's the good news. Whether this current cycle is unique or similar to the past, I think the breadth of transformation, the current speed at which it's advancing, the amount of capital being deployed, and the likelihood that a large number of incumbent businesses are going to be disrupted makes this a great time to start and grow a venture-backed technology company. Historically, most successful startups have been built during periods of massive change. So go back and think again of the dot-com era as an era that I kind of started my career. And people think of dot-com bust as a pretty negative period, but despite that negative connotation, we shouldn't forget how fundamentally the adoption of the internet at scale transformed the world economy. So in January of 2000, industrial, financial, and energy firms were the most valuable public companies. General Electric, market cap of 600 billion, Exxon, 420 billion, Citigroup, 300 billion. Those were kind of the top companies. Less than 25% of the 20 largest companies were venture-backed. But then if you fast forward to January of 2020, so 20 years later, the landscape of the largest US companies by market cap was overwhelmingly dominated by technology giants. So top 5 companies 5 years ago, Apple, 1.4 trillion. That's also like a lot bigger than the market caps before. Microsoft, 1.2 trillion. Amazon, 1 trillion. Google, close to 1 trillion. Facebook, 600 billion. And now those companies 5 years later are all even more valuable. And these were all venture-backed companies that leveraged technology-driven disruption and changing consumer habits to build iconic companies. Today, technology companies dominate the landscape, not just in terms of market cap, but also in influence, strategic importance, and job and wealth creation. So now let me shift a bit towards the more practical. In this environment, how does an entrepreneur successfully start, build, and finance a technology company? And the short answer is, I think, the same way that they've done for the last 3 decades. And what I mean by that is that certain elements of successful startups are fundamental and constant. So let me go through a few areas that I think are critical to success in building a business. Number one, the single most important piece of any successful startup is the team. So that means you guys. Entrepreneurship is special. It takes a unique person to be successful. Someone who will try the impossible, doesn't take no for an answer, and will literally run through walls to accomplish their goals. It's not easy. Most startups fail, but it's also true that most great entrepreneurs have failed, usually multiple times, before they find success. So failure is learning, so it's hard, but you should embrace it. And then choosing who's going to be in the trenches with you is critical. So that's first hires, and those people will not only will cement your culture for years to come, and it's really hard to kind of change that culture once it's in place. So it's critically important that you're picking the right people to be on your team. Now, a couple questions you might want to ask yourself as you're thinking about the team. Is the sum greater than its parts? Is the aggregate making up for any individual shortfalls? Will your team push you to be better? Will they ask you hard questions even when you don't want to hear them? Are you building a data-driven culture, meaning that you're kind of experimenting, adapting based on actual data? And will the team you build execute with maniacal focus? You should always look for holes on your team. If you're not a technical person, for example, obviously you need to have good technical talent, but it's not as easy as it sounds, right? You got to figure out what that actual technical talent even looks like, and who you might ask to figure that out. And then constantly reviewing performance is also critical. On small teams, one person can have a huge impact, good or bad. And if someone is underperforming, you need to remove that person. So make people changes intentionally, but once you decide to let someone go, then act. Never forget that your team is only as strong as the weakest link. Another related issue is who do you ask for help? External advisors, other people in your network. Most tech startup founders know how to build technical products and teams, but it's actually rare for founders to be exceptional in the beginning on kind of multiple aspects, right? A technical founder is probably not going to know much about go-to-market. So it's really important to figure out kind of who to ask. And getting help on key hires is probably some of the best assistance you can get. So one of the hallmarks of a great tech ecosystem, and I met a bunch of you last night, this seems like a great ecosystem, is a robust group of founders. Often, this is a great place to seek help. I'm constantly surprised by how generous founders can be for other entrepreneurs. And those are the people that have most likely solved the problems that you're dealing with and therefore the most helpful. Okay, so investors bet on people who can get messy, hard work done, show you can hire, make changes if you need to, and then identify areas where you need help. Number 2, is venture capital the right path for you? So I would say off the bat, venture capital is definitely not the best choice for most businesses. Bootstrapping leads to tons of successful and profitable businesses, and there's a lot of strings that come with venture capital, reporting, listening to other people's opinions, control issues, et cetera. So you have to weigh that out. But if you are looking to raise venture capital, then in most cases you really need to be addressing a real pain point in a really large market, oftentimes with initial technical advantage. Most venture firms focus on high-risk ideas with large potential outcomes. That's why profitability is not a metric that initially matters for most venture-backed businesses. So start with a clear problem and an unfair insight. If your product answers the question, so what? You're probably already halfway there. And your job is to find a problem that's expensive and uber painful or both, and then have an unfair insight that gives you a sustainable advantage relative to incumbents and new competitors. Often these unfair insights come from your own experiences of things that have been frustrating for you in your workflows or the tools that you use. Number 3, how do you show you have a valuable product, basically? In this market, most companies that we are funding, we would consider core AI companies, which basically means they're relying on a fundamental AI innovation. They're more than kind of a wrapper on someone else's LLM. But that doesn't mean that everyone needs to have an AI company. There's still plenty of areas of interest for venture, consumer, fintech, areas that are not as obviously impacted by AI. But what I do try to tell entrepreneurs is even if you're not an AI company, you better be very open-eyed about what AI is going to do for your customers and their businesses, because lots of things are going to change. For example, it's, in my opinion, highly probable that there'll be a lot less workers. So if you have a SaaS business and you sell based on seat models, that may need to change. So here's a few examples I wrote down of defensibility options that I think can be a real differentiator in a product. So data moats, especially again in the period of AI, differentiated data becomes really valuable. Network effects, that's like kind of social media stuff, right? More users tends to be more value. And then workflow integration, so like deeply embedding yourself in how your customers actually work every day. And then the last piece is kind of technical IP, patentable IP, that can be a differentiator also. And I'd add as early as possible that you should try to demonstrate measurable traction. So traction is like dating, talk is cheap. It's kind of like being there over and over again that shows that you're for real. And investors want quantifiable evidence that the market cares about what you're building. So what counts as traction? Revenue growth, obviously, but it has to be related to your kind of core products and not some services or something that you do on the side. Measurable funnels and cohort analysis, again, try to be very data-driven. And if you make your financial data a mystery to investors, that they're going to basically just stop paying attention. You should also use raw data, and you should own your problem. So if you have a high churn, that should be the first thing that you're talking about, and you should be obviously having a plan on how you deal with that. And if you don't have revenue, which in the strange world of venture is sometimes a positive, you need to show engagement and then a path to being able to generate revenue. Also, you need to show that you're laser focused on your customer and that you're prepared to iterate. You know, the coolest technologies in the world are not products unless lots of people want to pay for them. And so here's a couple things you could think about as you're figuring out your kind of product market fit. You should always be talking to customers. You talk to 50 customers before you start building something. Many of us, especially technical people, don't love talking to other human beings, but it's critical, right? It's much better than the stuff you're going to find out in your group chat. And then frame the problem in dollars and productivity, not buzzwords. You know, everybody is walking around saying they're an AI company these days. That doesn't mean anything. You basically have to, again, use data. And then tie the insight to something specific about the customer's life. You know, don't be vague. All right, number 4 here. Just checking time. So what makes a company stand out in a crowded market? Number 1, I'd say, is kind of real differentiation. So not just another color palette. If your product is like X but nicer, that's not a strategy. It's basically an aesthetic. I learned that word from my daughters. I never used it before. And then in crowded markets, pick a slice and own it. Think in terms of kind of the multiples of performance, right? Like a 10% increase in something is nice, but it's probably not worth the switching cost. A 10x better performance is impossible to ignore. So a few suggestions here. Again, attack a large vertical where you have domain expertise and can be obsessive about that and then highly differentiated. As I mentioned before, solve a full workflow problem, not kind of another check the box component of one. And then this is critically important, find true product market fit that basically can be demonstrated by engagement and the fact that customers really love what you've built. The second way to kind of stand out in a crowd, or the second part, is kind of your narrative and how you're framing your business as you describe it to other people, primarily investors. You really need to become a good storyteller. You know, everybody loves a good story, and you want to be able to tell a story that the investor you're talking to is going to want to tell his or her friends and partners. So you need to make your pitch clear. It needs to be bold, but plausible, compelling, and then, if possible, you want to create kind of a risk of, or a fear, I'd say, of missing out. Like, investors hate to think that they're going to miss the next best thing or next big thing, so make what you're doing sound super cool, scarce, and that they're going to be really sad if they don't invest in your business. So the key pieces of a story are basically explain the broken model or problem you're fixing, argue why the market's going to adopt your solution, show concrete milestones that de-risk your vision, and then again, have data to show you're on the right path. Another part of standing out of the crowd these days is having a capital-efficient business. Early stage capital efficiency is really appealing to most investors, right? You know, now we're in a point in time where companies are raising $30, $40, $50 million seed rounds. When they're able to invest in a company that's much more capital efficient, it allows them to write smaller checks, they can take more bets. So in general, raising a smaller round is probably makes your effort easier, and you're gonna look more compelling than a business that needs tons of money. But having said that, the capital efficiency is cool. The elephant in the room is that large numbers of companies are raising huge amounts of money. And many of them, unlike past cycles, need to rely on expensive compute from the large model developers like OpenAI and Anthropic. So there's lots of cost that's being built into these AI companies that didn't exist before. And AI infrastructure companies need even more money. So ironically, in some ways, it's probably easier today to raise money for a company that is going to need large amounts of capital than ever before. So that's good news, hopefully, for some of you. But you do need to be in the right space. So, flavors in investing kind of come and go. AI is definitely the predominant area of investment right now. And so if you're not in an AI category, raising a lot of money is going to make it really, really tough. So how do you kind of mitigate that? One way to mitigate capital risk is to identify kind of your biggest technical or business risks up front and figure out how to move them to the beginning of your development cycle, right? Like, take the risk. Don't spend $50 million getting to a point where you're going to have a binary risk and then it fails. Just take that binary risk, move it up front, and hopefully if you prove you can solve it, you create a ton of value, and then you can raise more money with less dilution. But if you can't, then you kind of haven't spent that first $50 million first. That's the way that a lot of investors will think about investing in your business. And then I can talk a bit about standing out in AI markets. So I mentioned before, one of the really cool things about this current tech cycle is that it's becoming, it's impacting the physical world. So robotics, right, is an easy way to kind of think about that. And it's allowing venture to invest in areas that historically have not been that interesting. Power generation, chemical exploration, or mineral exploration, lots of interesting areas that when you combine AI with robotics and sensors, you're able to do things that we never were before. And though that's opening up a much broader palette of investment opportunities for investors. So again, if you're a technical person in an area that's really couldn't kind of raise venture capital before, now you maybe can. And then the other kind of weird aspect of this particular point in time is that there are these groups of kind of world-class AI researchers, and putting together very high-level team of those people, like in and of itself, can help you to raise capital. All right, so now let me turn to how you might go about approaching venture investors. So first, I think you need to understand really what venture investors are buying. And it's basically a lottery ticket, but one that they've hopefully spent some time thinking about how to underwrite. So they want exceptional teams, huge markets, defensibility, compelling product, all the things that I talked about. But I think you really need to kind of do your homework before you start talking to investors, because not all investors are the same. There's literally thousands of venture firms and angel investors just in the US. If you're not, for example, if you're a non-AI-based consumer product with the hardware component, as I was alluding to before, that's going to substantially limit the number of firms that you can talk to. Firms are different by stage. You need to understand what stage the investors that you want to talk to are investing in, right? Early stage investors are very different than growth stage investors. Growth people are doing traditional financial analysis, applying multiples. There's nothing to value in most early stage companies. There's no revenue. It's basically just people. So like seed funds are not going to invest in your Series B, and growth funds are not going to invest in your Series Seed. So that's pretty easy to figure out. And then remember that venture firms are a collection of partners. So firms have reputations. Firms have better reputations than others, but it really matters kind of who you're talking to in the firm, the partner that was really you need to have that connection with that person, because this is going to be like a 10-year relationship, and that's what you need to focus on. I always tell people to kind of create a list of potential VC partners that you kind of sorted by stage, sector, and geography, kind of what spaces that they might be interested in investing in, and the partners in those firms that you may want to talk to. You should only target the ones that you think are a match, right? You don't want to spam a bunch of, the community is pretty small. One downside of kind of spamming a lot of investors is you look like nobody's interested in you. So it's also a bit like dating. And then whenever possible, get a warm introduction. Cold calls are not very effective. We get hundreds of inbound business plans a month, and you'd be very lucky if someone takes 5 minutes to kind of look at your plan and determine whether or not it's worth having a call. And then you should be sensitive to kind of how venture firms think of themselves. I mean, it's some firms think that or attempt to be more than just providers of capital, and so you should kind of engage in a conversation with them as such, right? Like maybe they're experts in go-to-market strategy, and so you should be aware of those types of things. And then I think an obvious thing, but one people forget about, is that oftentimes the best time to raise money is when you're not raising money, right? Like there's a whole dynamic about that makes it more organic. You can oftentimes get much more clear feedback. So you should be reaching out to people that you think you may want to be your investor 12 months before you're actually raising money, and start trying to build relationships with those people. And take their feedback. That's also very valuable. And then make sure you're kind of collecting all that feedback, creating good answers, and then constantly getting better at pitching, right? So it's a circle, and the more you do it, the better you get. Obviously, you only get one chance for an outreach and pitch. So if you are going to do some kind of intro, I'd keep it very simple. You need to have the kind of one-sentence elevator pitch that you really know cold. It's helpful to include a line of kind of attraction or engagement, something that's kind of showing them that you're kind of taking off. I'd mention something about the team, and then a very clear ask of like a 20-minute coffee. So if you're lucky enough to get past that and you eventually get to doing some pitches in front of investors, you've got a deck. I hate doing decks. Luckily, AI is helping out with that also, but it's hard to have a good deck. And that's because, in some ways, that's because venture capitalists tend to think of things in a specific way. And if you don't end up kind of matching the way that they think about decks, they're not going to pay much attention. So there's lots of examples on the internet these days of successful pitch decks and stuff. So you should definitely associate yourself with those. And then I'd say, like, think of your deck as kind of a progress report and really like what your vision is. But it shouldn't be fantasy, right? Like the best way to lose credibility with investors is to have kind of no basis in your numbers or a realistic view of kind of how you think that your product, your revenue might grow over time. And then I say, like, prioritize your pitches, right? So you've got this list, you started having some relationships with people, you start doing pitches. Like, it's better to start with the one that you care about the least, right? The one that you really want to have, maybe make that later in the process after you've kind of gone through some of these and that you've gotten feedback, you've gotten tough questions, and you've kind of been able to deal with that. Because investors are going to dig into all the things that I've talked about so far, right? Your team and your background, any obvious holes in the team, how you're going to deal with that, failure modes for the business, key risks, repeatability, and then unit economics, which is always a really important question, especially CAC. And you should know your numbers inside and out and backwards and forwards, which means you, not your VP of finance or someone else on your team, you need to own your numbers and be responsible for the numbers and be able to answer pretty much any question about the numbers. Almost all venture investors come from financial backgrounds. And so they've seen literally thousands of kind of decks and business models, so they're going to know your numbers pretty well when they look at it. And if you can't kind of relate to them on that level, like it's over. And projections especially, right? Like projections are 9 times out of 10, we look at projections that are more than 12 months old and like directionally does this seem right? It's very hard to make kind of real projections at the seed or Series A stage. But again, it's a way of kind of proving credibility if your projections are defensible. So be optimistic, but again, be able to kind of defend what you did. And then the last thing I'd say I'm going to go over here is from the VC's perspective, when they meet with you, kind of what are they looking for that they may not tell you that they're looking for. First and foremost, they want to know that you can attract and hire truly exceptional people. And as I said before, if there are holes in your team, which oftentimes there are for early stage companies, I mean, you don't have a lot of money to hire people, you get a lot of credibility by saying up front, like, these are where I think the holes are. This is how I'm going to go get it. And here's a couple LinkedIn examples of the kind of profile person that I'm going to go after. Being a rapid learner and being able to iterate is a critical skill because like all kinds of crazy shit happens and you got to be able to like figure it out. And so being able to talk about examples of where you've done that before is very helpful. And then really importantly, the VC wants to feel like you're going to be coachable, right? They've gone through this process millions and millions of times. I can't tell you how kind of off-putting it is when you get a first-time entrepreneur that comes in and basically feels like they know everything and like nothing you could say could be valuable. That's just not a good way to start any relationship, especially an investment in your company. You should be willing to talk about kind of governance and control issues, mostly I think in a way to demonstrate that you're thinking about the investment as a real partnership. In early stage venture, usually the cycle is like 10 years before you start getting capital back, or 7 to 10 years. This is a long-term relationship. It's very much equivalent to a marriage. And you should be projecting that you kind of respect that, and that's something that you're going to value, just like they will. Obviously, having some buzz around your company is super helpful. And then the last thing, again, which I'll just beat up on, is make sure that you know your numbers. Okay, so that's pretty much it before we can go to some Q&A, but I'll end with something less tactical and more existential. As I've said, I have a huge respect for entrepreneurs, so I think it's really hard, and hats off to all you guys. But entrepreneurship is a marathon littered with glorious short sprints. You will definitely pitch badly, you will hire poorly, you will make terrible decisions that you regret, but that's basically the job. So what separates founders who succeed is stubborn optimism, constant learning, and adjusting and ruthless execution. And remember, like basically venture investors are not trying to crush your soul. They want people with grit, judgment, and the ability to build something meaningful. So keep your head down, your imagination high, and your metrics clean. Thank you very much.
Okay, so remember, we can use the Menti tool. You'll just use this code right here, the QR code, then enter the number, and you can ask questions for Peter. Thank you so much. This was so helpful. I was not prepared for you to bring dating up so much, so early in the morning. It was a bit much.
I think it's a thing most people can relate to.
Yeah, well, it's relationship management, right?
Yes.
So yeah, I appreciate that so much. So can you define capital efficient for everyone else in the room, not me, of course?
Sure. Capital efficient basically means you don't need a lot of money to get to whatever milestone you're building. So like software companies, you basically just need people. But if you're building batteries or power generators, there's a whole other element of expense, manufacturing expense, inventory that makes it much more difficult to, there's much more risk associated with those things. So it's just a more complicated business that takes more money to build.
How do you view AI hardware startups that have to compete against the established incumbent giants, e.g. networking hardware startups taking on Broadcom?
Yes, so that's the beauty of technology, innovation, and frankly, Silicon Valley and communities like this, right? It's been repeated over and over again. This time it's a little different, like Microsoft has kind of did a good job of, at least initially, kind of staying relevant with AI with its partnership with OpenAI, but at the end of the day, like what happens with the big incumbents? They become slow, they become red tape, they become dependent on like certain products that aren't evolving anymore. And that's why the young, quick startups can come along and kind of take over. I mean, OpenAI is a great example. Although it's been around for 7 or so years, ChatGPT was 3 years ago, it's now generating billions of dollars of revenue a year, and I don't think it's over yet, but I'm pretty sure that OpenAI has now won the kind of consumer space with ChatGPT, and there's like a ton of pressure that they're putting on Google, which like 4 years ago we all would have said is like the greatest business of all time and is never going to be disrupted. So that's the fun part of early stage technology companies.
If we were an early tech company, how do we decide if it's better to remain bootstrapped or bring in investors for technical help? I love this question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So this question implies like investors and technical help like are glued together. They're not. So you could bootstrap and still get great technical help from lots of different sources. And when it comes to technical help, I would actually say most venture firms are actually not expert in technical help. They're good at understanding like what technologies might be unique and valuable and then helping you bring that to like a commercial state. For deep technical help, that's where you go to like your PhD advisor or universities or again, other entrepreneurs that are super technical. And you'll find that there are groups of these people that just kind of geek out on this stuff. And that's the best place to get technical help. To me, the question of bootstrap versus venture or other types of investors, 9 times out of 10, how much capital do you really need quickly to basically prove your business? And if you're in a business that's going to be like relatively moderate growth, I would say bootstrap it. If you're in a business where the stakes are super high, there's lots of competition, you don't have time to go slow, that's usually where it makes the most sense to find an investor.
How should angel investors evaluate an AI company?
Yeah, well, the real question is like, how should anyone evaluate an AI company? It's like I said, literally every company, every founder that we talk to is like an AI company now. But what's crazy is like in some ways it's true, right? We invested in this company called Commonwealth Fusion, which is building basically a fission reactor And it was really hard for them to raise money 6 or 7 years ago, but now that like there's such an obvious need for new power generation with all the data centers they've been building, like it's absolutely an AI company. So the more you believe that this technology is going to impact a really broad spectrum of businesses, the more it's probably true that like most companies are in some way AI companies. There's so many different versions of AI companies. There's what I would consider kind of infrastructure companies, which are LLMs or semiconductors or the hardware type stuff of this. And then there's like the application layer, which ranges from like AI lawyers and accountants to better workflow and CRM. So I think the infrastructure and like the core AI stuff is like really important that you're kind of fundamentally understanding the technology. And there's many venture firms that can do that, but not all. And then on the application side, it's kind of less important what the fundamental technical innovation is, and more important on kind of how you're going about you go to market and the product basically that you're building, solving an important problem. And that's not that different than companies in prior cycles.
What are red and green flags you look for in founders?
I'd say like I kind of highlighted the things that are obvious. I've been in and around entrepreneurs for 25 years, and like it always surprises me when you kind of meet a person and you're like, this person's like going to be an awesome entrepreneur. Like it's almost, not all the time, but often you can it's almost like this energy, or you can just tell that this person's like different and willing to do like crazy stuff that I am certainly not willing to do, and take like large amounts of risks and really be like so dedicated and passionate about this thing that they're working on that you're like, wow, I would like to bet on this person. And frankly, 90% of most super early stage venture investments like come down to that. Red flags, I'd say, are really the people that are really adamant that like what they're doing is perfect, that they know like the path, that they know what the outcome's going to be, and like that's just not how it works. There is no company that was ever created that like went from here to there as they expected, right? It's more like this, and there's all kinds of challenges that come along the way, and that really determines whether or not the company's going to be successful. So if you're not willing to take that input, and you don't always have to take advice, you don't always have to like take the advice, but you need to be open to listening to it and debating it. Those would be the red flag people.
That's great. How dangerous is it for investors to think that investing now in an AI startup will lead to a winner in their portfolio, given the potential for an AI crash in the next 5 years? Ooh.
Well, if that's your philosophy, you shouldn't be a venture investor, that's for sure, because that's what happens. There are going to be way more money, way more companies are going to fail than prevail in this environment. But if it's anything like past cycles, the big winners will end up being like way more value than the aggregate cost of the losers, right? So like you got to pick the right ones, which probably means like you're not going to have a portfolio that consists of one company, but you're going to try to have a way to diversify your portfolio a bit, and you're making bets again on like different people and maybe different businesses, and so. Yeah, that's how I'd answer that.
Great. Okay. What role do traditional banks play in the VO ecosystem or VC ecosystem for businesses?
Yeah, and this brings up a good point, which I think of one of my oldest buddies, Rob Torres, is the guy that got me here today, and like he's part of your community, and it is important to have as you're building out these ecosystems of entrepreneurs and ventures, there's a bunch of critical pieces that kind of all have to come together, right? So it's the risk capital, the entrepreneurs, the technology, the university, the engineers, but then also the kind of service providers and the other providers that need to kind of fill out the ecosystems, and banks are certainly one of them. I would say, I don't know if this is going to like be on the internet or anything, but like banks like JP Morgan and stuff, not so great to work with if you're like an early stage small business. But there's a bunch. I'm not super familiar with the banks in this ecosystem, but the Silicon Valley banks of the world, which probably everyone's heard of, they have a way of dealing with startups that is like much more conducive to the things that are actually going to happen for those businesses. You're not going to be able to borrow as much money as you would if you were a traditional business that had lots of revenue and profitability. But it is important. Like, they play an important role in the ecosystem. They can be very helpful, and in addition to providing capital, they have a really good insight into a pretty broad slice of the ecosystem and be helpful partners in that way too.
Okay. How do you see balancing bringing in AI with the environmental impacts that we are starting to understand AI brings with it? We saw people gravitating towards green companies. How does that fit now?
Yes. So Khosla Ventures is probably one of the most famous kind of what we would call like climate investors. We've been pretty consistently investing in those types of companies for 20 years. Unfortunately, some of those companies require a national policy that supports those companies, and we're obviously going through some changes around that right now, so that makes it more difficult. But there's other markets like Europe and Asia, which continue to invest heavily in those spaces. I think the irony of this moment might be that the power needs and the other infrastructure needs of the data centers, et cetera, that are being built out, which I already talked about, may end up causing people to adopt these greener solutions as like more practical solutions, which would be awesome, right? Like, so the irony could be that maybe this is something that actually ends up driving the adoption of some of these more cleaner technologies, and that would be amazing. But it's also an example of all the kind of unforeseen things that happen during these transformative periods.
Right. What is your advice for founders of companies that don't fit into the AI B2B SaaS box in terms of finding the right funding partner?
Yeah, there's literally, like I said, I think an investment firm for every startup, right? It's just a matter of like finding them, and some are harder to find than others. And there's tons of noise in periods like this where it feels like AI companies are kind of drowning everything else. But a huge number of investors will say, well, that's the perfect time to like be investing in some of these underinvested things because it's going to be we'll get a better deal. So yeah, I wouldn't be discouraged by that at all. It probably takes more work to kind of figure out who those firms might be, but they definitely exist. So just do your work.
Okay. Have you seen founder create credible, defendable costs around AI infrastructure? So have you seen an example of a founder actually create this?
The Stargate project, which is the one between like Oracle and OpenAI, is like $500 billion. That's very hard to do by yourself. And it's literally something that I think most of us have kind of never seen before. So if the question is like, how do you create defensible cost structures in the infrastructure business, it's hard because the amount of capital that's being needed to continue to keep up the pace of kind of new model generation is like nothing that we've ever seen before, and almost hard to really get your arms around. I mean, $3 trillion is like a lot.
It really is. It really is,
Peter.
Yeah, it's a lot. What's the company investment you regret not making?
Yeah, I mean, everybody always asks these types of questions, and like, I don't know, there's way too many for any investment firm, so I won't comment on that one.
Okay, let's see another question. I have a follow-up question for that. What's like the wildest pitch you've ever received where you're like, was there ever a time where you're like, who is this clown? But you sat through it, like horror
that happens
stories.
all the time, actually. And like you like to think that your partners are like, different firms work in different ways. Our firm in particular is like pretty open about the non-obvious choice and being, not a consensus-driven place. So we get all kinds of like different views from different people and some pretty outrageous. I was trying to think of a recent one. We had someone come in that basically wanted to, I'd say, like take a large part of rural America and turn it into kind of a new country. Like it was just, you can't even like with a whole new infrastructure thing. And And it was so crazy that like at the end of it, I was like, am I crazy or is this person crazy? Like sometimes those crazy ideas actually become, like did anyone really believe 5 years ago that AI systems would be able to kind of do what they're doing today, right? And it does take these dreamers
Absolutely.
to imagine a world that doesn't exist.
Yeah, like I'm still like, how do phones work? I can't.
That too.
Yeah,
that
right,
too.
okay. I think that is all the time that we have, but this was amazing, and I think you really offered something to everyone in the crowd, so thanks for being here, Peter. We appreciate
thanks.
you. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.